This story's climax is what exactly? Is it the protagonist's struggle when facing uncontrollable forces? Is it the turning point of fate that throws the protagonist into a desperate situation? Or is the final showdown between the protagonist and the evil forces? Dive into the world of genetically modified werewolves. Subscribe. Chapter 23. Stretching his arms out above his head, Slade groaned and opened his eyes. Tilting his head to the side to gaze at his adorable mate, he frowned when he saw empty sheets. Sitting up on his elbows, he turned his head to the open door, frown deepening. It was almost 9 o'clock, and Slade could hear a few people downstairs. Getting out of bed, he put on a pair of pants over his boxers and quickly jogged down the stairs. He tried contacting Nine through their mark, or even trying to find her location, but no such luck. He didn't like that it was becoming a common occurrence to not be able to link with her. It terrified him. Feeling uneasy, he searched through the house, asking everyone that crossed his path. And with every person, his panic intensified. Not a single person saw Nine, and Mason and his mutts were gone. Slade spotted one of his warriors that patrolled in the morning. He grabbed the man roughly by his arm and pulled him close to his face. "Did you see Mason leave?" he said gruffly. The frightened and confused man nodded his head furiously. "We escorted them to the borders, Alpha," he exclaimed. "Did you see who was inside the cars?" The warrior shook his head. "No, the windows were heavily tinted. We didn't bother to check, because we thought that they would all leave." Slade narrowed his eyes at him, equally scaring the man. I mean, why wouldn't they leave, since it's not their pack?" he stated as if it was obvious. Letting go of his collar, Slade asked him one more question. "Has it ever occurred to you that they might have taken something or someone?" He stressed out the last word, and the man paled. Oh no," the man whispered. Slade grabbed his collar with both hands. "What do you mean, oh no?" I am sorry, Alpha. I didn't think much of it that the Luna's scent was on the car." Slade roared viciously and shook the man. "If I find out that my queen has been hurt because of you and the other members' sloppy security, then do expect strict punishment." He hissed in his face, dropped the man and turned to storm away with no clear direction. Slade's thoughts haunted him. Nine being kidnapped by Mason was just not possible. Then how could he have done it? Something was right. His mate could easily take on Mason and his warriors if they tried to kidnap her, and they searched their belongings for anything suspicious like Wolfsbane, because Slade wouldn't put it past Mason to do something shady. She also wouldn't go willingly with them without telling him, because they trusted each other. Their bond was strong, so Nine would never think of going with him, and yet. Like a sharp jolt, Slade remembered Nine's words. I don't know what's happening, but I think I'm changing." Changing? Slade stilled, his face losing color. Not possible. It couldn't be. Shit. Slade punched the nearest wall in anger. Forgetting the hole, he bolted to the infirmary, where he slammed the door open, frightening Dexter in the process. "Alpha, Slade!" Dexter exclaimed and stood up from his desk. "Is there a possibility of the beast controlling Nine's body?" Slade practically shouted, eyes wide with panic and distress for his mate. Dexter stammered as his eyes widened in realization. "Where's N9?" he whispered in disbelief. "Answer me!" Slade thundered. His body shook violently. A strong and authoritative aura seeped out of his pores. Hearing the commotion, Nolan and Tori entered the room. "What's going on here?" Tori spoke out, looking as confused as Nolan. Ignoring the newcomers, Dexter nodded his head stiffly. When it happens, Nine always goes un conscious so the beast could do anything." His voice sounding small. The thought of his best friend in danger, no. Everyone else would be in danger. "Alpha, You have Dexter was cut off when Slade stormed out the room, already barking orders to prepare the cars and his warriors. For him, nothing was going to stop him from getting his mate back. Oh, how he was going to enjoy ripping that mutt to pieces, he thought mercilessly, eyes flickering black and emerald. Nolan moved to go after his alpha when Dexter suddenly stopped him by his arm. The always calm Omega did not like the look he got from Dexter, and what he told him only sent a sharp chill down his spine. The weather turned ugly. The sky above was full of tumultuous, dark, ragged clouds threatening to rain, but it did not deter the group. Led by a powerful alpha, there was no stopping them. Only the goddess could save the pack from the wrath of an unforgiving mate. They are at least 3 hours ahead of us, which means they are probably at the pack. Ryan said tensely, slowly pressing down on the pedal, but trying not to go too dangerously high. He took peeks to the side and cringed at the sight of his friend. He looked in the rearview mirror at Nolan, who had his head down, as was no better looking than the alpha. In the passenger seat, Slade sat there in deadly silence. His arms crossed to hide his clenched fists, face blank, but eyes burned with a fiery green flame. He only concentrated on two things: his mate and holding in his fury, just waiting to release it on that damn bastard. They wouldn't let him drive for fear of his and everyone's safety since he was running on anger. They couldn't run in wolf form either because they needed their strength. If Mason had 9, then he wasn't going to give her back easily, and not to mention the beast was in control, so he definitely would not back down without a fight. But if Slade could make 9 submit with the power of the beast, then he could at least try on the beast himself. Stop the car. Ryan's thoughts were harshly interrupted. What? He responded, taking a look at his alpha. Slade glared dangerously at him. Stop. The car. Ryan pulled over to the side, along with the other warriors pulling up behind him. They barely made it to the highway, and were still surrounded by woods. Opening the door, Slade got out and walked to the front of the SUV just as the wind picked up. Ryan and Nolan too got out, but stayed near the doors. Facing the woods, they watched as their alpha stripped out of his clothes until he stood bare. I'll meet you there. If I stay in the car any longer, I'd probably end up killing you. Slade confessed without emotion as he shifted into his wolf. The guys did not argue since they too could feel the energy crackling dangerously around their alpha. If you get tired, link me. Ryan told him and went to pick up the discarded clothes. Slade looked at him, his eyes burning brightly. Don't worry, I'll have more than enough energy to fight. He said too calmly, and was about to dash into the woods when Nolan's voice stopped him. Before you go, I have to tell you something. He spoke, taking a step closer. His face grim as he said, Dexter told me to tell you to prepare yourself, because what you are about to see. Nolan paused, his eyes looking at Slade in despair. The sky above crackled with oncoming lighting. Is a glimpse of what the beast is truly capable of. He finished and lowered his head. Slade did not reply. Instead looked to the woods and ran. Disappearing from sight, Ryan turned to Nolan. It's a lot worse than what you just said, isn't it? The beater whispered. Slightly lifting his head, Ryan could see the struggle within Nolan's dimmed eyes. What Dexter told me, I think. Nolan could not finish that sentence and only shook his head. Ryan turned his head to the woods. His face was grave. Let's go. At the border of Mason's territory, Slade could smell the prominent scent of fresh blood. His eyes widened in panic and halted to a stop. He could hear the others pull up behind him, but his eyes stayed on the darkened woods that were eerily silent. Seeing their alpha motionless, the warriors stepped out of the cars and immediately scrunched their nose when the smell bombarded them. Blood? Nolan muttered behind him, hand. Brows pulled together, he looked to Ryan holding it in his fear-stricken face. You don't think, but a harsh look from Ryan cut him off. Ryan took a step to his alpha, his mouth open to speak. Everyone shift. Slade commanded through the link, interrupting his beater. His mood darkened as his fear and anxiety rose. His emotions were changing wildly. Nothing could calm him down until he knows his mate was safe. But Slade knew, what he sees will challenge Nine and his relationship. He prayed that they were strong enough to battle it together. Sensing that everyone shifted into their wolves, Slade slowly led the team. He didn't rush it because his instincts could tell that danger lurked. "Where are the patrolling wolves?" One of the bigger pack members whispered lowly, as if his voice could be heard out loud. "I don't know," Slade answered, also picking up on the lack of security. He knew Mason would have doubled his guard because he knew they would come. His muscles tensed, heart pounded and stomach was in knots at the thought of something going dreadfully wrong. The air was stifling. The more closer they got to the center, the more cautious and guarded everyone became. They couldn't control their bodies as it reacted to the unknown threat. First standing on end, ears twitching at every sound and body humming with energy ready for a surprise attack. The woods were so silent, but the sky cried out, roaring with thunder and lightning, and yet the clouds did not open. It waited, watched as Slade neared the front of the pack house. The scent of blood increased, suffocating them. No words were needed as everyone prepared themselves for what was ahead. Because it didn't take only a few dead bodies to create such a strong, pungent smell. Slade and the warriors finally broke through the woods. The sight before them would forever scar their minds. It was a pack massacre. Everyone was frozen at the land before them. It took Slade momentarily to shift and forced himself to walk and look around, the others hesitantly strolling behind him. Those who could not stomach the sight turned to the woods and emptied their stomachs. Struggling to breath and cold sweat rang out from his pores, Slade walked among the mutilated. Flesh wounds ripped open, blood splattered everywhere, staining the ground, and body parts gruesomely detached or hanging from the body. No one was spared, even the houses that lined up the road were broken in. No one wanted to see what horrors lie inside the homes. Mothers who clutched their children and those mated clung together died in each other's arms. No doubt it was the beast's doing. Slade finally understanding what lies within Nine. The need for blood showed through the way the beast butchered the pack. He was merciless and unfeeling. Brutal and savage. Inflicted only pain to its victim by hunting them down. Slade grimaced at the bodies. So much blood. His palms were sweating. Though he knew the worst was over, but the atmosphere was still lethal. He first had to find his mate. "Oh, okay, everyone pair up and find." All guard shot up when an ear-piercing scream shattered the silence. Not a second passed when all warriors charged after the scream in defensive formation. Rounding the back of the pack house, everyone's heart dropped. Especially Slade's. There in the center of what was one of the most grotesque, monstrous and bloody sights, was the lone survivor and murderess kneeling before unrecognizable bodies, piled upon each other with arms and legs sticking out in awkward angles, some hanging off by a thread of bone and muscle. 9. Slade's voice cracked as he whispered his mate's name. His body failed him. He could not move a step. He was so close to her, and yet he could not reach her. He tortured himself by watching his mate suffer by herself, and he couldn't do anything. He didn't know what to do. Time was painfully slow for everyone. On her knees, clutching her head tightly, Nine could not hear Slade as she let out a heart-splitting screams. Her eyes shook in terror as she stared at the pile of bodies. She couldn't tear her eyes away at what she'd done. She was too weak. Too weak. She was a monster. Hated what she was capable of. She hated who she was. Big, fat tears welled up in her eyes, her breathing was shallow and her voice turned hoarse. Nine forced herself to look at her mate. Her lips wobbled and tears overflowed at her mate, who couldn't hide his expression from her. To see him look at her with those eyes, her heart shattered. I did it again. Chest tightening, 9 stuttered her confession. I couldn't control him, I tried but I couldn't do it. She looked away in disgrace, her face contorting into anger and pain. He was too powerful, I was weak. Her voice got louder and louder, as if she was shouting and putting all the blame on herself. I can't do this. I'm a monster. I deserve to die, how could I? Slade, snapping out of it, fell to his knees and pulled his distraught mate into his arms. He squeezed her so tightly, he wished he could take the pain away, just anything to help his mate. He was so useless. He could do nothing but hold her close as 9 trembled in his arms before her body shut down and she fell unconscious. Slade caressed her hair. Ryan, Nolan. His voice sounding dead, as he addressed them without looking. The pair stepped up. Yes, Alpha. They answered. Slade's head tilted up and he looked them in their eyes and said emotionlessly, make sure the council thinks this was a rogue attack. The warriors' eyes fell to the ground at their Alpha's command. Yes, Alpha. They bowed their heads when Slade stood up with 9 in his arms and headed in the direction of the cars. They watched as the pair disappeared in the woods, but all knew what to do. They would make sure they wiped out all evidence of their Luna's presence. They would protect their Alpha and Luna to the death, even if it meant going against the law. 2 weeks had passed. Rumors of Mason's pack massacre spread among the werewolves like wildfire. Slade's men took extra precautions to make sure that all traces of 9 was gone. His pack, loyal to their Alpha, shut their lips tightly. There was nothing Slade could do to lift the shadow that loomed over the house. But he had no time to worry about that. In such a short time frame, Slade had to make some of the hardest decisions. One of them was to give 9 Wolfsbane. This may pinch a little. Dexter mumbled to 9, who was sitting on the table with her arm out just as her friend injected the highly lethal dose of liquefied Wolfsbane into her bloodstream. In the corner paced a tense and concerned mate who watched over the ordeal. Slade held back from charging over to Dexter and ripping the needle out his hands. He hated it. Wolfsbane was not something to turn to even in this situation. But they had no choice. The beast was growing and they had no way to stop it. Slade wanted to find a way to separate the beast from 9, but what could they possibly do? 9 was a unique case. They could not use conventional methods on her, nor could they research about her. It didn't help that Dexter had limited knowledge about the effects of the drug on 9. He only used it when the beast was coming forth and stopped when 9 was in control. They never tried injecting the drug into her. They were completely in the dark, and no matter how much 9 tried to assure him that it was the only way, he was still worried. But Slade would not give up. He gave permission for the injection only if it was temporary. He would search everywhere to find anything other than the drug to help his mate. Slade moved to stand in front of his mate once Dexter pulled away. His eyes searched her body to see anything out of the ordinary. How do you feel? He asked, eyes boring into hers. Once the drug took effect, 9's pupils expanded and her irises turned completely white. Not a single trace of red, and she could feel it. 9 could barely sense the beast, it was like he wasn't there. She rejoiced in the matter, and exclaimed out happily to her mate, I can't feel him. It's like he's gone. She smiled at him. But when she thought she was smiling at him, her body did not react. 9's face was completely impassive. No expression upon her face, no emotions in her eyes. It was then Slade and Dexter found out one of the symptoms of Wolfsbane. Not only was the beast dimmed, but also 9. Looking at her was like looking in the vacant eyes of an empty, lifeless soul. Chapter 24. A week had passed since the first injection of Wolfsbane. It had been 7 days since 9 was her curious, bubbly self. Now, there was only word that could describe what 9 had become: a robot. For her, she barely noticed the change, because all she could care about was that the beast was dimmed. His power and strength diminished as if it were locked away. For her it meant no more killing, just like she promised Slade. She would always keep her promise, especially the ones from her mate. While 9 walked around with a lack of interest in everything, Dexter, Tori and other pack members kept a close eye on her. She never left a room without someone knowing where she was at all times. Their alpha was not taking another risk. It pained him to see his mate suffer, and he could do nothing but watch. Though Dexter did try to convince him to spend time with 9 in hopes that his presence and the fact that they were mates would mean that 9 might be able to fight the drug symptoms and turn back to her normal self. Instead, Slade chose to spend every second he could to find another way to destroy the beast. He was determined to separate the two, to find something, anything. He followed up on any lead, researched on the oldest records he could get his hands on. Ryan and Nolan and a few other trusted warriors were at the Alpha's beck and call. Whatever he needed, they would get it. Dexter worried for him. He saw signs similar to Victor. His obsession made him stray from what was important. Searching for answers could destroy a man. He was thankful, though, that Slade had his strong-willed family. They forced him to eat and sleep and to allow his subordinates to rest. But no matter how much they tried to convince him to take a time out, Slade would not give up. He wanted 9 to live normally, wanted her to stop living in fear of Victor and the beast. There was a reason why the goddess paired them up, and Slade damn well wasn't going to prove her wrong. 9 was his mate and he'd protect her with his life. She was his everything. "What's the news from the council?" Slade asked gruffly, eyes trained on the old, leather-bound book. Nolan rubbed his eyes tiredly and answered his alpha. "They'll send someone to drop off what you requested, but they are beginning to wonder why you want the old records." Slade growled lowly. "There are some things they need to stay out of." Nolan stayed quiet. The door opened to reveal Ryan. He smelled heavily of coffee, but his body was exhausted and it showed in his sluggish movements. Slade took no notice of his friend and roughly asked, "Where's my mate?" The beater looked puzzled. "I thought Dexter already asked you," he said unsurely and turned to Nolan for confirmation, but all the Omega did was widen his eyes and shake his head. "What do you mean?" Slade snapped, eyes clouding black. Ryan gulped. He was taking 9 for a walk in the woods. Thought the fresh air could help, and so he could talk to her and get her to open up. Fists clenched and jaws taut, Slade was shaking in anger. He specifically told the pack that 9 was not to leave the pack house. Not with her being so vulnerable. Trying to control his rage, he took deep breaths and shut his eyes. He thought of 9 and how being locked up would suffocate her since she loved being outside. "Calm down, Slade," he told himself, "it's for her benefit." "Okay. Fine." He spat out and then glanced up, his eyes still showing his disapproval. "As long as there are at least 10 guards with them, if not more." The uncertain look from Ryan was all it took for Slade to abruptly stand up from his chair and race out his office, his subordinates hot on his heels. He would not let 9 out of his sights. Anything could happen to her as long as she's on that drug. Until then he would make sure to protect her. "I'm sorry, Slade." Ryan apologized as they made it out the house. Roughly taking off his tea, Slade growled back, "I'll accept your apology when I have my mate safe and sound." And then shifted into his massive, grey wolf and dashed into the woods. He just needed to get to his mate. Meanwhile, unaware of her mate's distress, 9 continued on with her walk with Dexter. She enjoyed finally being outside and barely took notice of the quiet woods. "So what did you want to talk about?" She turned to Dexter, her eyes blank. Smiling at her, he pushed up his glasses and said, just thought a walk would help." Moving her eyes to the ground, 9 thought about the side effects of the Wolfsbane. Though she could barely feel the beast, she knew she wasn't herself. She didn't talk as much, lacked interest in anything, and worryingly enough, Nine struggled to feel any connection to Slade. It felt like the mating pool was barely even there. She feared that if she lost the pool, then she wouldn't be attracted to Slade. Was it even possible? Another thing, and far more important symptom, she found out and failed to tell anyone, was that. How boring. The beast could still talk to her. Nine blinked rapidly. But his voice still echoed through her head, messing with her thoughts. You just had to take the Wolfsbane. So weak. He snickered darkly. Nine barely had the energy to snap back. A sudden wave of exhaustion hit her. So she just ignored him. The beast was interrupted by Dexter. You know, I never asked you this be, but how come you and the beast never tried to work together? He questioned almost nervously. I mean, you both sure are the same body, he said in a small voice. Nine didn't even have to think about the question before she answered. Because no lichen will submit to a weak human, she said stiffly. Damn right. I'd never let you take full control. The beast growled aggressively. This body only needs one of us to control it, and it sure won't be you. So enjoy your freedom while it lasts, because your time is almost up. The beast quieted down, leaving a frightened Nine to think about his words. Though it sounded more like a promise. Only the strong survive, she whispered softly. Dexter also looked to the ground in despair. I guess he really is too dominant. Finally noticing how far they walked, Dexter stopped in his tracks and said, Wish you old head back. Nodding at him, Nine turned around, but suddenly her senses picked up on the ground vibrating. Snapping around, she stared intently into the silent woods in alarm. What? But Nine cut him off by raising her hand. Her body tensed, the familiar feeling of adrenaline rushing through her blood, and her muscles tightening alerted her to the threat. For years she was accustomed to the sensation whenever he was close. No one but him could cause her to feel like this. Whipping to Dexter, her face blank, but no amount of Wolfsbane could hide the strong emotions whirling in her eyes. Especially the one that stood out the most. Fear. Run, she whimpered. Eyes widening behind his glasses, Dexter and Nine bolted. And that's when they charged. In an instant they were flanked on either sides by giant and vicious-looking rogues. Nine could easily see their bulging muscles, as if they were on steroids. White foam dripped from their mouth as they snapped their jaws. Two of the fastest cut off the pair's escape. Immediately Nine took a defensive position in front of Dexter, and shifted into her wolf. And in the worst possible moment, found another symptom of Wolfsbane. She could no longer shift. No. Nine shook in horror. She was defenseless, and even worse, she could not protect Dexter. They were after her. Not Dexter. They would kill him. Ha! What did you expect? The beast laughed maliciously at a frozen Nine. Did you forget that you are a pathetic human? His voice dipped real low and dangerously. Without me you are nothing. No? Nine whimpered. At least 15 massive rogues surrounded them. Dexter tried to shake Nine out of her frozen trance. Nine. He cried out and jerked when a rogue from behind nipped him on his leg. Dexter backed up into Nine, who still did not move. The rogues closed in on them, and Dexter noticed how different the wolves were. Their eyes were blank of emotion, and only held an animalistic glare. They looked just like Nine. It was as if their human side was suppressed. Dexter didn't have time to think when the rogues ceased their growling. Coming closer was a sound of a vehicle. It weaved in between the trees and came into view, stopping a few feet away from Dexter. Nine did not turn around because she could no longer control her body, but it stiffened greatly. And Dexter knew why. He reached blindly behind him and grabbed Nine's hand. It was his turn to protect her. Even if it meant dying. The door opened. He stepped out and Nine shrunk in fear. Her body grew smaller with his every step, but Dexter gripped her hands tightly and squared his shoulders. Sweat was dripping down his temple and neck, his body shook like a little leaf, but he did not back down when Victor stood towering before him. Though Dexter was almost half his former mentor's age, Victor did not look like an ordinary 60-year-old. Clearly over the past 6 months, Victor had been busy. Very busy. Dexter could feel the authority and power rolling off him. His body was suddenly built like an ox. He knew that Victor experimented on himself. Though whatever Victor did, he must have perfected it in order to look how he is now. His face was more rugged than before but no less menacing. And those eyes. Dexter would never forget those black, soulless orbs. "Dexter," Victor said, his voice laced with evil intent. An amused eyebrow was raised as he smirked at the helpless pup he adopted. He moved his gaze to the she-wolf, who still did not turn around to face him. "Number 9. He chuckled darkly when she flinched violently. "Good, she still fears him. It will definitely speed up his plans." Dexter squeezed her hand for what little comfort he could give. "I'm afraid I can't stay long. Turns out your mate is heading our way." Victor immediately noticed the way his creation slightly turned her head towards him at the news. He almost laughed at her desperation in thinking that her mate would save her. "I'll keep this short," he said and pierced his gaze on his creation. "Number 9, get in the car." When she didn't move, he frowned irritably. "Don't make me angry," he spat. "Did you forget what I can do to you?" Letting out a small whimper, 9 tried to release her hand from Dexter's. "She's not go and GWI with you," Dexter exclaimed bravely. Victor's patience snapped. He gripped tightly around Dexter's neck and lifted him off the ground, forcing him to let go of 9's hand. 9, feeling her friend's hand let go, whipped around and gaped helplessly at the sight of Dexter in Victor's clutches. She opened her mouth to say anything, but years and years of torture and fear immobilized her. She felt trapped, like she was in a steel cage she couldn't get out of. Her very being was locked in that cage. All her emotions, her feelings, everything was sealed in there tightly, just building up with no escape. For now, only her terror was shaking the cage, but it was only a matter of time before that cage broke. And that moment was close. All it took was a trigger. 9 was close to crumbling at her helplessness, and in desperation, she begged for help to the only one who could save them. "Please. Please help me," she pleaded with the beast. Her heart pounding in her chest as she watched Dexter try to claw out of the chokehold while gasped for air. The beast let out an amused rumble. "Like I'd help the weak. Only the strong survive." 9's legs shook and struggled to keep her standing. "Someone. Anyone. Please help," she cried out wordlessly. But no one answered. The cage rattled again. Pity, Victor thought as he gazed at Dexter with no emotion. If the pup was loyal to him then it wouldn't have to come to this, but too bad. Though he did give the pup credit. If it weren't for him, then he would never know of his creation's weaknesses. Guess letting his creation go out in the world and observing her from afar was the right choice. Growling at the weak pup, Victor threw Dexter to the side near the rogue's feet. Neither 9 or Dexter were prepared for what happened next. "Kill him," Victor said with no emotion. The beast grinned. As time slowed, 9 could feel herself sink in deeper into a bottomless pit. She didn't even notice she was no longer in control, and that her body was changing. Feeling like an outsider in her own body, she stared as the rogues closest to Dexter aimed for whatever they could sink their teeth into. The cage shook louder as her emotions whipped up a violent, furious storm. So much blood. It made her physically sick and distraught to watch her best friend. Dexter's unbearable and piercing scream haunted her as they teared into him. Dexter locked eyes with her and 9 could not breathe. She could see it. The way his eyes looked at her softly, no matter how much he looked scared and in pain, Dexter was silently saying goodbye. The cage rattled violently, the bars keeping her in were cracking. Almost there. The beast grinned wider, eyes wide in anticipation. Dexter let out a wobbly smile. 9 did not blink. The light in her friend's eyes dimmed and she watched it until it went out. Her brain failed to understand. Why was his eyes so lifeless? Why did her friend drop like a dead body as the rogues walked away from him? Why didn't he move? Dexter. The cage exploded. No. 9's voice shattered the air. In a second, her eyes coated a striking blood red. The effects of Wolfsbane was overpowered as the shift took over every cell in her body. 9 hunched over. She let out an ear-piercing scream that infused into an animalistic and savage roar. Her skin moved grotesquely as the bones fractured and reformed under the layers. Her muscles bulged with power and strength. Her body was quickly growing in size, still growing even after passing 6 feet 5 inches. Her clothes ripped but pure onyx fur sprouted out. The demon among werewolves was being released. 9 was so far lost that she was shifting into her purest form. She was no longer the weak werewolf, as everyone thought her only to be. No. 9 was shifting into a full-blooded lichen. But with so much authority and power, only one was fit to be in control. The beast thrived in the shift while 9 was pushed back to the abyss, where the beast waited patiently for 19 years for this day. Finally he could do what he always wanted. Once he completed the shift, there was going to be another massacre, only this time everything in his sights would die. The beast was humming with excitement. Quick! Bring her down. Victor's sudden orders had the rogues rush to 9. They bit deep into her hind legs, forcing her to fall on all fours. All 15 rogues made sure to hold the lichen down, as another 3 of Victor's henchmen rushed forward. 2 carried high-voltage tasers, enough to kill a human, but stun a lichen, and the other carried a large needle, and a bag filled with undiluted Wolfsbane. While the 2 electrocuted the lichen to slow down the shift, the other used the sharp needle to pierce the flesh, and held the bag high as the yellow liquid wormed down the plastic wire and into the bloodstream. It was more than enough to sedate the lichen. Victor watched on and smirked victoriously. Poor number 9 would never understand what's going because she is probably unconscious right now. She would never know that her shift takes time until she is a complete lichen. So if he were to stop it midway, then Victor would be the one in control. Perfect. All was going to plan. Walking forward, Victor crouched down to the lichen's level and observed it struggle to keep its eyes opened, but it still glared at him viciously. That other being must likely be in control, Victor thought. Arrogantly smirking, he said, "Oh, I'm going to have fun breaking you." Chapter 25. A loud howl filled the air, snapping Victor out of his triumphant thoughts. His lips curled in distaste as Alpha Slade was running full force towards them. Following behind him was his pack members, all looking like they were ready to send them straight to hell. "Get her in the truck." He ordered his men and then felt a burning sensation within as he used the Alpha mark to command the rogues to hold off the Alpha. Victor was pleased with his mindless minions. He realized that a rogue with its human conscience was useless to him because their emotion would always make them refuse his order. So instead, while his creation was out in the world, Victor designed a new breed. One that obeyed only his words. But of course Victor couldn't hold himself by adding a little of lichen blood into the rogues. It was just enough to improve their abilities without killing them. The result was perfection. One of his rogues could take on 3 ordinary werewolves. They had a high tolerance to pain, meaning they could still fight even if they were fatally wounded. Victor especially loved the killer look in their eyes. He knew that even with the alpha, the pack was no match for his minions. Victor watched as the rogues formed a heavily guarded line. No matter how much the alpha and the members attacked or tried to push through, they could not make the rogues move an inch. Smirking at the alpha's frustration, Victor turned away and headed casually inside the vehicle like there wasn't a vicious fight going on behind him. He chuckled low and deep when the alpha let out an outrageous roar. Wonder what would happen if I put lichen blood in him. He wondered out loud and sat back as the truck moved and disappeared into the woods. Slade managed to slip through the rogues and dashed forward aiming straight for his mate, but one of the rogues caught up and blocked his path. The frustration and anger was overwhelming him. How could he let his mate slip through his fingers? How could he let Victor capture 9 when he promised to protect her? How could he betray her like that? Slade! Nolan shouted through the link, snapping his alpha out of his trance as he watched the truck get further away. He twisted his head back to see his pack losing the fight. Many were injured because it seemed like the rogues could not be killed. With a heavy heart, Slade rushed to help his pack. He furiously apologized in his head to 9 for not going after her. Slade put all his anger in taking out the rogues, making sure to sever their heads or snap their spines to leave them immobile. 15 bloody rogues took highly skilled warriors much longer than expected. Slade did not like that one bit. Whatever Victor had done to the rogues and whatever he was planning did not look good for the werewolf community. Shifting into his human, Slade immediately took action. Help the injured. Get them to the pack house and make sure all available healers are there. The alpha ordered and forced himself to see to his pack first, but with every second that passed, Slade's anxiety increased for 9. His body was already shaking, as his instincts reacted to his mate, who was not by his side. Slade! Snapping his head to the sound of his beater. He saw Ryan running towards him, his face was heavily distressed making Slade frown. What is it? He asked once his friend was close enough. It's Dexter. Slade's eyes widened, finally remembering that Dexter was with 9. Ryan shook his head at his alpha. It's pretty bad. He barely has a heartbeat. He said grimly. Slade shut his eyes and held in his anger. Dexter was practically everyone's friend. It was hard to hate that man. He'd done so much for Slade and yet he couldn't repay him. Just make sure he gets whatever he needs. I don't care about the cost, just save him. Slade commanded Ryan stiffly. Slade was quick to grab Ryan before he left. He looked him dead in the eyes and said, once everything is taken care of, I want you to alert the council. Tell them something big is going to happen, and we need to prepare for it. Gulping at the intensity, Ryan nodded hesitantly and then jogged away. Slade took a last look into the woods. He bit his lip hard, drawing blood from his sharp teeth as he clenched his hands into tight fists. Just hang on, 9. I'll find you no matter what. He vowed deeply and touched the mating mark on his neck. As long as he had that proof, Slade knew he had a chance. Pacing in the dark depths of the abyss, 9 was waited anxiously for the beast to wake up. He was still in control of their body, and she had no way of switching back. 9 was so scared. She was terrified because she was alone. Dexter was dead, she couldn't feel Slade. The overwhelming pressure of emotions broke. 9 grabbed her head tightly and screamed. Her body curled inward as she sunk to her knees. Fresh, hot tears were pouring down her eyes with no signs of stopping. Slade! Dexter! She cried out into the darkness. Help me! She whispered vulnerably and curled tighter into her ball, rocking back and forth. How pathetic! 9 gasped and snapped her head up. She could feel the beast presence but could not see him. What she could see was the beast waking up. It was like she was on the other side of a glass, just watching herself outside her body. So this is what he went through for years. 9 thought miserably. Now it was her turn. The worst thing is, she didn't know how long she'd be here or if she would ever be strong enough to want to take control. From now on, we are doing things my way. The beast growled at her. 9 remained quiet. All she could do was watch as the beast controlled his body. There was nothing she could do, nothing she wanted to do. So for the first time, 9 just shut down. She didn't fight anymore. And because of that, her presence felt a little lighter, like she was barely even there. Just like the beast wanted. He smirked internally at the weak human. So pathetic, it made him cringe that he shared a body with her. 2 very different souls infused into one body. In a way, the beast did appreciate that the moon goddess herself gave him a weak female. The complete opposite of him. It would be much easier to control her now. Finally awakening from that damn Wolfsbane, the beast blinked a couple of times to focus his pure bloodshot eyes. Unfazed by the concrete walls that surrounded him, almost reminding him of the arena, but much smaller. The beast, however, was a little annoyed with the chains holding him down. Finally in his own lichen body after so many years and standing tall and proud, only to be heavily shackled to the wall by pure silver. How troublesome, he thought in irritation. In front of him were a few large doors that looked extremely hard to break through. Above one of them was a screen glass and behind it were humans. Annoying humans. But the beast only had eyes on one. Victor. His lips curled and a deep growl rumbled in his throat. He remembered those times he went through whatever torture that bastard did to him. But he was patient. Just waiting for the perfect opportunity to kill him. But just not yet. So you finally woke up? Victor said with his expressionless face, though his eyes gleamed with anticipation. Which one of you are in control? My dear number 9. He paused for a second and then uttered the true name of the ghastly beast that resides within number 9. Or are you Lycarian? The true werewolves of this world? Victor's lips curled and eyes shone in pure pride and awe. In answer, Lycarian surged forward, straining at the heavy chains with his 7-foot, heavily built and muscular body. His jaw wide open to reveal his curved, sharp teeth and blood-red eyes narrowed at Victor, as he let out a vicious, blood-curdling roar that shook the glass window. Victor let out a dark chuckle. Things were going just as he planned. Are you able to speak? He asked, knowing that the lichen had evolved within number 9. Feeling a force build up in his mind, Victor dropped his guard and they were connected. But Lycarian did not speak. He just watched Victor with intense eyes. Resuming his blank face, Victor asked through the mind link. Is number 9 dead? No, was his reply. Already irritated with his response, Victor's eyes turned to slits as he harshly spat. An evolved lichen like yourself is only capable of short answers. How pathetic. Lycarian snapped his jaws threateningly. I'd watch what you say, mutt. These teeth aren't just for show. His eyes shone with arrogance. Clearly not intimidated, Victor continued on with his interrogation. Well, I am assuming that number 9 must be stuck deep within you, so that means she can still hear me if she went to the same place as you. Lycarian eyed the man curiously. You know awfully a lot about us, he stated. Now the one smirking in arrogance, Victor replied, did you really think I would let my precious creation just escape like that? He chuckled lowly. I, of course, had her tracked. Every move she made was under my supervision. It wasn't that hard to get even pack members to help, especially since they didn't think she was safe to be around. From within, Lycarian could feel number 9's wretched emotions. Rolling his eyes, he focused in on the man. To be honest, I wasn't going to let the pack mutts keep her long, but after watching her, certain things were revealed that I would not have known. Rubbing his bearded chin. Oh? And what would they be? Asked Lycarian as he got comfortable. Clearly what the mutt was going to say would be long and boring, but might provide some useful information in the future. I already knew that mutt Dexter was hiding the fact that Wolfsbane was an effective depressant on number 9. But of course you figured that out. Victor mocked, making the lichen growl. The second would be that number 9 could communicate through the link. That would have made things so much easier in the arena. He sighed almost sadly. But soon after joining the pack, new things I learned about my dear creation. Like how she can be controlled by the alpha mark, has the ability to control rogues, that one is my personal favorite, he chuckled as if he had an inside joke. But the most interesting one is that she has a mate. This perked Nine's attention from within the lichen. Of course he would just be a tool. Lycarian could feel Nine begin to anger, but he held her in. It was too easy when number 9 decided to become one with the pack. Imagine the power I'd have over her. Just threatening to kill them would be enough to control her. As Victor boasted and laughed, Lycarian began to shake in fury, and it wasn't his doing. Feeling pissed at the humans' resistance, Lycarian made sure 9 knew her place now. Watch it, 9. If they died it would be your fault. That made the body shake stop. Lycarian internally grinned. Remember, you were the one who decided to get close to them. The moment you did not want to kill was the moment that you became weak and pathetic. Only the strong survive. Feeling satisfied at the lack of her presence, Lycarian focused back to reality. Victor, quickly noticing the exchange, made no attempt to hide his interest. Oh? Was that dear number 9? Curling his lips, Lycarian replied. You were making her angry. Maybe I should let her out to kill you. He narrowed his eyes dangerously. Victor easily caught his bluff. Like you would pass up the chance to kill me yourself. Lycarian revealed his sharp teeth in a mocking smirk. Never mind that, do tell me, is number 9 broken yet? Broken? Lycarian imitated in confusion. Smirking deadly, Victor leaned forward and rested his palms on the table before him. Want to get rid of her for good? He asked. Ignoring 9's panic, Lycarian spoke up, his voice filled with deep interest. Keep talking. Instead of answering, Victor shot him a snarky smirk and moved his hand to press a small button. But the effects were anything but small. The next thing Lycarian knew, his muscles tensed and twitched as thousands of volts of electricity shot through his body. He roared out when the current ceased, only to once again electrocute him. Beyond furious but helpless against Victor, Lycarian could only glare at him. Finally releasing the button, the old master arrogantly stared down the beast. I'm sure you know that lichens need to be the strongest surpasses any creature on this earth. He stated, the will to survive is almost scary. Victor chuckled amusedly as Lycarian stood on all fours, breathing heavily as he listened to the dead man. Victor's eyes held a dangerous glint in them. I have this theory that if a lichen is in danger, then he would do anything to make sure he survived, but for a human. Victor's fingers slowly moved to another switch. Well, let's say that we give up easily. Especially when we have nothing to live for. He flicked the switch and released his mindless, savage rogues. Foam dripped from their mouths, hair standing on ends, and vicious snarls emitted from their throat. Now, let's see if my theory is correct. And if it is, then the council won't stand a chance against me. Victor thought. Lycarian's lips curled. He faced the rogues and slowly stood tall and proud. Eye burning red, muscles bulging and claws sharpening. Only the strong survive. The rogues pounced and 9 faded just a little bit more. Chapter 26. 2 solid months have passed and the days have been extremely slow for Slade. Long and torturous. But he was the alpha, he had to be strong and lead his pack for whatever was to come. The council and werewolf community were on high alert, giving Slade barely any time to search for his mate. The only comfort he had was the mark on his neck. The very symbol that connects the two, a gift from the moon goddess for every soulmate. Once mated, nothing other than death could separate them, but even so, the mark would still remain as a reminder of your mate. Currently Slade was stationed at Wolfgard, also known as the main stronghold of the council community. It was a vast land that covered many acres. Well away from humans and on private lands owned by the Wer community. If there was an attack, no humans would know. It would be for the best because what is to come would only be a bloody massacre. Sighing heavily, Slade tiredly rubbed his eyes. Surrounding him were his father, Beta, and a few men who represent the council. Others were running all over the place. It was almost strange to see the council in such disarray. But then again, they never had a threat that could destroy everything that they had built up since their existence. It had come to everyone's attention that Victor, who stayed quiet for a few months, was back and clearly planning an attack on the council. Victor didn't bother hiding his intentions. When Slade told the council of the new breed he created, they immediately went into action. All alphas were contacted and informed. Every pack was guarded heavily, but especially Wolfgard. Damn it! A large man representing the council slammed his fist into the table and almost shattering with his force. Where the hell is that bastard? He shouted in anger. Just like the others, everyone was looking for Victor, but like a snake, he easily slips through the cracks and hides in the shadows. With every rogue activity suddenly disappearing, no one could get even a single lead. To the Wer leaders, it was scary to think that Victor had such a control and power over the rogues. Slade was right to get rid of Victor as soon as possible, but instead allowed him to gain immense strength, not only with the rogues, but also his research that could possibly be the end for the council community. Slade, not even bothering to calm the man down, only moved his hand to touch the mating mark. He sighed in relief in feeling the mark pulse under his touch. 9. The most Slade could do that would give him a chance to find his mate and save the werewolf community was to find Victor, and once he does. Slade's eyes burned like the depths of hell. He was going to slaughter that bitch. The door burst open. Everyone watched as the four intimidating but wise wolves strolled in. Two of them were old but lived to see the changes of the werewolf community, the others were Slade's age. They were placed on the council for their change of perspective in the evolving younger generation. So what's the sitch? Orst, the youngest, asked. His never-ending mischievous smile was placed on his boyish face. Drac slapped the pup at the back of his head with his large hand. This isn't the time to be joking, he said with a lack of emotion. Drac was practically Orst's babysitter and kept him out of trouble. Being scolded by that giant, anyone would cower under Drac's glare except Orst, who had no sense of danger. Enough? Vince sent a glare at the pair. He was known as the forever angry werewolf. But where everyone may show empathy or skip around a sensitive subject, Vint was the type to give it to you straight and bluntly. Though not very liked, he was the most trusted because he would never lie when asked to answer a question. Finally there was Tian, the commander. A strong and worthy werewolf to be on top. Tian only seeks justice and aims for peace between wolves and humans alike. So when threatened, Tian is not a werewolf to be taken lightly. Alpha Slade, any progress? Tian asked after sending a respectful nod to Paul, his old friend. Leaning over the table that was littered with a mix of laptops and papers. Grids and maps were on display, as well as surveillance used to track any suspicious activity. The room was practically designed as an underground surveillance room to watch the outside world. Afraid not? Slade shook his head. Since all rogue activity has stopped, we cannot find Victor, and those that we hunted down and captured were all. Pausing, he grimaced at the councilman. Slade's father continued for his son, all rogues captured were humanless. We could not get them to talk. He concluded. All ignored as Orst whistled in awe. Tian looked to Slade. What do you think we should do? In time, Tian knew that Alpha Slade would become the new commander, as he was blessed by the moon goddess. He was a born leader. This was the perfect time to give him experience, especially since his mate was also involved. Where any other werewolf male would be going crazy in searching for his mate, Alpha Slade was as calmly as he could to solve both problems. It showed that he could make sacrifices. Even the most important person to him. Green eyes darkening, Slade stared at the man. What can we do? His voice almost unrecognizable, as Slade held in his wild emotions. We will wait. There's no point in looking for someone who does not want to be found. What we do is wait for Victor to reveal himself and make sure that we are prepared for whatever he brings. He said through clenched jaws. Everyone was silent for a moment, thinking about Slade's words and the struggle he went through to say it. None of them could look Slade in the eye as a sign of respect, because no male could so easily give up on looking for his mate. Are sure you could give up on your mate? Vint asked without an ounce of pity. I'm not giving up on her. Slade roared at the man, his body shaking and already about to shift. Snapping his head to the side so he didn't have to look at the man, that would only anger him. Slade angrily growled before responding. 9 is the strongest person I know. His body started to calm down. She will fight this. His breathing began to even out. Slade slowly turned his head and faced everyone proudly. She is my queen and we will meet again. He said that last part to Vint, as if silently challenging him to disagree. Vint backed off. Very well then. Tian spoke, breaking the tension in the room. We will do as Alpha Slade has said. He said loudly. All wolves heard the message loud and clear. The room shifted with a different kind of tension as Tian's eyes swept the room, gazing at the werewolves. We prepare for war. Slade touched the mark once more. Just wait a little long 9. Soon we will see each other again. Soon. 9 felt that she was so far gone that she thought she heard Slade's voice. Even if it was just her imagination, 9 held on tightly to the thin thread. No matter what, she would not let go, would not give up even the smallest chance. If the beast could wait 19 years for this moment, then so could she. She just had to be strong. Just a little longer. Oh, she's still there. 9 snapped her head to see Victor through the eyes of Lycarian. He was standing over the beast and staring into his eyes. It sent a chill down 9's spine, because it was almost as if Victor was staring straight at her. Like he could see her fear. Looking away and shutting her eyes, 9 could not look at the man's smug face. The very man who she would always fear. Just a little longer, 9. Could you get your mud-ugly face out of mine? Lycarian spat in irritation. Victor visibly scowled at the heavily breathing Lycan. 2 months and the damn human would not break. No matter what torture Victor done, number 9 was still holding on. There were many times that Lycarian was close to killing him, because he would push it just a little too far. Victor had to make sure he doesn't kill his greatest creation, while trying to get rid of an annoying human. His lips curled in disgust. Guess he would have to try another way. Well, Lycan, it seems I have to try something else. Lycarian let out an amused smirk. Victor narrowed his eyes at the Lycan, noting mentally in the way that he was developing human emotions and expressing them visibly. Interesting. Having trouble getting rid of a human. Pathetic. In the next second, Lycarian's head was snapped to the side. His pupils contracted into deadly slits and his eyes burned red, as he slowly looked back at the dead man. You dare punch me? Lycarian stood to his full height in pure rage. His body reacted with his emotions and the chains began to crack under the force of his muscles tensing. His body oozing out his lethal aura and intent. The rogues nearby all cowered at the threat, their instincts begging them to escape. But not Victor, who allowed a superior smirk to grace his face. "Have you forgotten?" The power radiating off the lichen just brushed off on Victor, as if it was nothing but an annoyance. He lifted his head in arrogance. "I'm not the same man as 2 months ago." To prove his point, Victor's own body began to transform. His body reacted to the many doses of lichen blood he injected into himself. Muscles bulged, veins surfaced to the skin, as blood rushed through all parts of his body, supplying max amount of oxygen, as his heart pumped deeply. Controlling his shift, Victor stopped transforming until he was in the perfect human form. Half human and half lichen. Victor thrived on the power he felt within. He already tested out his power, and knew in this form he could take on an alpha. Though he would have to keep researching in order to fulfill the transformation, and become the first werewolf lichen. But he was impatient and greedy. He wanted to reveal the werewolves to the world as the superior race, but first he had to get rid of the pesky mutts that oppose him. With his red eyes gleaming with exhilaration, Victor proved to Lycarian, who was still the top alpha. "You dare stand above me, mutt?" He spat at the lichen. Clearing his mind, Victor could feel his body pulse, as he commanded the lichen with the help of the alpha mark. "Lower yourself," he commanded in all seriousness, and watched with eagerness, as Lycarian stiffly lowered himself, whilst still holding his gaze. No matter whether you are a werewolf, or a lichen, you always follow the command of those stronger than you. If it wasn't the lichen blood within him, Victor would not been able to command the lichen so easily. Victor smirked. "Lower," he said. His tone revealed his amusement at the lichen snapping his jaws, but obeyed the order. In time Lycarian would adapt to his body and overcome Victor, but for now, he was in the palm of his hands. "Now let's get down to business," he stated, and towered over Lycarian to mock him. The lichen could only snarl like an angry dog. Number 9. 9 flinched at the sound of his emotionless voice. She had hoped that Victor had forgot about her, but it was useless. Once he has his sight on someone, there was no escaping. "It seems that you are strong enough to withstand the physical torture, but then again, I did a pretty good job on training you." Laughing in sick humor. Standing to his full height, Victor's face went blank, but I betrayed his malicious intent. "Though I never prepared you for psychological torture." 9 froze. She immediately went to block her ears and fell to her knees. "Did you know, if you had just listened to me like an obedient pup, then dear Dexter would not be dead?" Victor snarled without mercy. "Please don't. Please don't," she whispered desperately. "It was all your fault." Rocking back and forth, she thought of something else, but everything was useless. "And just like him, I'll make sure your so-called pack will join him. I'm sure Lycarian wouldn't mind helping out with that." Every word could be heard clearly. "Oh, we would have so much fun, 9. Just like the old times." Lycarian grinned, and 9 could feel his body hum with the thought of killing. "After I killed everyone and leave them in a bloody mess," Lycarian chuckled in amusement. "I mean, you know how messy I get when I go into a frenzy." The memory of Mason's massacred pack flashed through her closed eyes, but then the image changed to show 9's pack. Lycarian forced her to think of all her friends and family dead before her. He made her remember the smell of fresh blood, the thrill of ripping bodies apart, and finally, the lifeless look in the eyes of the dead. Lycarian made her remember. On the outside, Victor could see the white in the lichen's eyes fade. "HMPH. I'll leave this to you then," he said to the lichen, who was clearly enjoying more than Victor. Because whereas Victor wanted to get rid of the human to allow the lichen to reach his full potential for the fight against the council, Lycarian's motive was to gain his own body back. Once the human was gone, he would be something better than a pure blood lichen. One that could evolve as time goes on. "Guess it's the two of us now." Lycarian said in sarcasm. Shutting his eyes, he concentrated until he fell to the depths where Nine resided in. Limbo would be the best way to describe the emptiness. Except of course the windows that allowed Nine to see what he saw. If Lycarian remembered it corrected, the saying would go something like the eyes are the window to the soul. Either way, there was only the two of them. As it's always been. A lichen and a little girl. But now, Lycarian would make that it would only be him. Leisurely, the lichen creeped behind the huddled figure. His massive figure easily towered over Nine, as she held in her tears and whimpers. His eyes held no emotion, as he stared down at her. To think I wasted my time waiting, when you were always this weak. He spat mercilessly. Just a helpless human. No way could you overcome me. Lycarian leaned down, his sharp teeth inches away from Nine's ear. You will never be strong. Fade away, human, no one needs you. He whispered harshly. Nine lifted her head from her knees. Slade does. She hiccuped, the last of her strength shone through her clear eyes. She cupped her neck and held onto it dearly. Laughing humorlessly, Lycarian straightened up to his full 7-foot height. The alpha. Your mate. He scoffed, did you ever think that his life would have been much happier without you in it? That struck Nine, her entire being shook. A blow straight to her heart that left her breathless. Her hand slowly moving away from the mark, until her fingertips were grazing it. Lycarian smirked. He found extreme pleasure in this form of killing. Gave him the same thrill as tearing his victim apart. Let's imagine it, shall we? The arrogance radiated of the lichen as he spoke. If he never met you, then he probably would have gotten another mate. Please stop. Then he wouldn't have to deal with all those moments you broke his tender heart. He mocked and taunted in fake sympathy. No. Nine bit her lip hard. His other mate would have made him much happier. I mean, they wouldn't have a beast lurking within them that didn't have the need to kill, and let's not forget the fact that you will only cause problems for you, dear mate, and the pack. Remember the lichen that came to challenge you. Nine felt herself losing energy. Felt herself fighting a little less. Face it, Nine. Lycarian spat out her name in disgust. Everything started with you. Her hand dropped away from her neck. Her body sagged, no energy was left to hold up the useless attempt to hide in her fatal position. Lycarian moved around her to face Nine head-on. He reveled in the look of her lifeless eyes, as she stared blankly ahead. Her soul was visibly disappearing, starting from her feet and slowly inching up. She was at her end. It's okay, Nine. He said, and she slowly lifted her head to look at him, as he delivered the final blow. All will end. When you die. That thin thread that Nine held on for so long. Snapped. And so she fell. Sorry, Slade. I wasn't strong enough. The beast chuckled heartlessly and watched with amused intent as the soul vanished. He was finally one with his own body. Only one soul to control the power within. Heart pounding loudly. Body prickly with pure excitement. Eyes untainted. The pureblood lichen opened his crimson, bloodlust eyes. Finally, it's my turn. Lycarian's lips curled. An unexplainable sharp wave of unbearable, raw pain burned through Slade's neck. The shock so sudden, the impact left him gasping for air and body immobilizing. Slade could not hear the others shout out his name, as his legs gave way, and collapsed to the cold hard ground. His eyes blurred as hot tears welled up in his eyes, disfiguring his sight. He could only concentrate on the searing pain in his neck. It felt like thousands of iron-hot blades were tearing at his skin. Clawing at his mark. N9. And then, it all stopped. Gulping a lungful of air, Slade's head was spinning as he tried to sit up. But hands held him down, shouting something at him, but all he could think of was his mate. Something happened to 9. N9. He gasped out, once again trying to sit up. Must find her. Voices finally reached his ears. Slade. Calm down. One said, holding down the struggling Alpha. I can't. Slade forced the hands away from him and got up to unsteady feet. He gripped the closest table to steady himself, but forced his legs to walk to the door. His father and close friends were worried about him. Clearly had no clue to what was going on. Paul stepped in front of his son. Slade, tell us what's going on. He asked calmly, holding his hands out to his son. Instead of listening, Slade kept on mumbling breathlessly, I have to find her. A sharp sting once again shot through his neck, making him flinch and cup the area. Slade started to panic. The mark! He exclaimed, eyes wide in fright. I can't feel it. I can't feel her. A sudden thought stopped Slade from a full-out panic. He grabbed the closest person to him, which just so happened to be Nolan, and commanded him in an eerily low voice. Is the mark still there? Nolan's terrified eyes moved to the Alpha's neck and watched as his hand slowly moved away. Slade watched Nolan's reaction carefully. But that one look had him shoving Nolan out of the way in search of a mirror. Finding the closest thing to one, Slade stared into the reflection. His skin was scorched, leaving a dreadful red burn on his neck. Any sign of 9's mark disintegrated into nothing, leaving no trace of her existence. Slade. His wolf reached out to the shocked human. Is she? It pained him to even complete the sentence. I don't know. The news had Slade shutting down. His body refusing to operate. But it was the next few words that had Slade's heart and soul shatter. But Slade. 9. 9 is no longer our mate. Be part of our werewolf community. Subscribe.